Admiral Yi Sun-sin is a national icon in South Korea, but his most famous endorsement comes from the very nation he defeated. After his victory in the 1905 Russo-Japanese War, Admiral Togo Heihachiro was reportedly compared to the British commander Horatio Nelson. He supposedly replied, "You may compare me to Nelson, but not to Yi Sun-sin. Next to him, I am but a petty officer." This quote is a cornerstone of modern Korean history. It appears in museum exhibits, textbooks, and news media as the ultimate validation of Yi's genius by his greatest rival. However, this statement appears nowhere in Togo's official records, diaries, or contemporary speeches. It is a complete fabrication. The quote was systematically constructed between the 1920s and 1950s. It began as a vague claim in a 1921 biography by historian Park Eun-sik, and was later polished into a full narrative by the Yi Sun-sin Memorial Society in 1955 to serve a growing nationalist agenda. Togo's actual journals and public records show his genuine praise was reserved for Horatio Nelson, the man he had studied intensely during his years training in Britain. This leaves us with a historical vacuum. If the quote is a lie, we have to ask why the myth of Japanese Yi worship started in the first place. The answer lies in the high-stakes decade leading up to 1905, when Japan found itself in desperate need of a hero. During the Meiji Restoration, Japan abandoned centuries of isolation to build a modern military. They modeled their new navy directly on the British Royal Navy, importing everything from steam engine designs to officer uniforms. Because of this heavy British influence, Horatio Nelson became the mandatory idol for every Japanese naval cadet. His tactics at Trafalgar were the benchmark for success. By 1904, Japan was on the verge of a war with the Russian Empire, a massive European power with a deep-water fleet that far outclassed anything Japan had ever faced. At this time, Japanese officers were still training under Western instructors and commanding ships built in foreign yards. They were acutely aware that no Asian navy in the modern era had ever defeated a top-tier European fleet, leading to a pervasive sense of doubt among the ranks. To convince their sailors that victory was possible, Japanese command searched for a historical precedent, an Asian Nelson who had already proven that an Eastern fleet could destroy a global superpower. Their own history offered no such figure. Japan's most famous warlord, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, had attempted a massive invasion of the mainland in the 1590s, only to see his navy repeatedly crushed in the Straits of Korea. Lacking a naval conqueror of their own to inspire the fleet, Japanese leaders realized they would have to co-opt the history of the man who had defeated them centuries prior. In the 1890s, Japanese intellectuals and Western historians like James Murdoch began reframing the history of the 16th century invasions for a modern audience. They started by portraying Toyotomi Hideyoshi as the Napoleon of the East, elevating his failed conquests to world-shaping European military history. This created a new formula. If Hideyoshi was Napoleon, then the admiral who stopped him, Yi Sun-sin, was effectively the Nelson of the East. This sudden interest in Yi was a calculated move to harvest his tactical record for Japanese naval morale. By circulating stories of Yi's victories, Japanese command showed their sailors that an Asian fleet, using superior discipline and terrain, could indeed annihilate a larger, more prestigious armada. James Murdoch's English-language history texts carried this comparison to the West, cementing the image of Yi as the Korean Nelson in the international historical record. In a strange turn of geopolitical utility, Japan used the ghost of their former enemy as a psychological crutch to build the confidence they needed to face the Russian fleet. Everything changed in 1905 at the Battle of Tsushima. Admiral Togo Heihachiro led the Japanese fleet to a decisive victory, effectively wiping the Russian Baltic fleet off the map. Japan now had its own living hero. The need to borrow Yi Sun-sin's legacy vanished instantly, as Togo became the new symbol of Japanese naval supremacy. Togo was deified, his image enshrined at places like the Chichibu Ontake Shrine, and his name became synonymous with the triumph of the East. Consequently, the Yi-Nelson comparison was dropped from Japanese military literature. The borrowed hero had served his purpose and was now obsolete. Decades later, Korean intellectuals found this discarded piece of Japanese propaganda. They saw the Nelson comparison as a prestigious title that could validate Yi's genius on the global stage. They took the Nelson label, combined it with the fabricated Tobo quote from the 1950s, and built the foundation of the modern myth we see today. Admiral Yi's tactical record is an objective historical fact, but the prestigious titles used to describe him tell us less about his life and more about the 20th century empires and nations that needed his image to bolster their own confidence.